hard to believe that it's been nearly 30 years since Annie opened on Broadway. What little girl wouldn't jump at the opportunity to play one of the 7 orphans in the musical they idolized? This is me, at age 9. I was one of the lucky ones to play an orphan in both the Broadway cast and national tour of the show. People used to tell me I was going to be a star. Signing autographs, meeting celebrities, making personal appearances, all became part of our everyday lives. Up to that point, we were your typical, everyday, precocious kids. Growing up in the late 70s and early 80s, most of us had heard of Annie, or sang along to the record in our room. As luck would have it, we ended up in the show, singing and dancing through 8 performances a week. Many of us left our families, friends, and school to travel around the country in a touring company, some for as long as 2 years. But then, just as quickly as it seemed to arrive, it was all gone. When our contracts ended, nobody prepared us for our return back home, or what was to come. 20 years later, I'm still trying to figure it out and wondering, is it just me, or have the other girls also struggled with their life after tomorrow?
The sun'll come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there'll be sun. Just thinking about tomorrow clears away the cobwebs and the sorrow till there's none.
Every little girl knew about Annie at the time that it opened, and every little girl wanted to be Annie at the time that the show opened. So I had my album, and I would sing to Andrea McCardle every single day, 1,000,000 times a day, as much as I could.
I knew when it opened, I read the reviews, I saw the lines around the block, I, looked on with envy like most girls in America.
I just wanted to be an Annie. I wanted to be an Annie. I used to look at the album and look at the girls on the stage in the beds and be like, that was just my absolute dream.
I was addicted to the show. I bought everything I could. I had Annie, everything. Everything I could get my hands on, I had.
I was drawn to Annie. I lived it. I breathed it.
As soon as I saw it, I said, I have to be in it. It was just like a fantasy. It was just overwhelming. I remember feeling overwhelming emotion, like probably the first time in my life.
I think most children in America wanted to be me. They wanted to be Annie, and I kind of just wanted to be like most children in America.
My mother took me to see the Broadway play because I just loved it. I heard about it on TV. And we sat in the mezzanine, first row, and I kept leaning over and saying, Mom, I'm going to be Annie. Shh, quiet, Roseanne, watch the show. No, really, Mom, I'm going to be Annie. Okay, whatever, be quiet. And I just hounded her.
We stood in the back of the house. I was with my father, and I recall very distinctly when we left the theater, being completely enchanted by what I had seen, and my father saying, apropos of nothing, you're just not Annie material.
It just seemed like an incredibly real and attainable goal, that these kids were up on stage doing what I love to do, and it seemed perfectly natural that I would be able to do that too.
I was stuck in this little girl thing, probably up until my 30s, quite frankly, up until I had kids. I always saw myself as that little girl playing Annie, and that's kind of how I lived my life.
I know that we wrote this show at a time when our country was in a relatively difficult situation. Economically, it wasn't wonderful. It was the Nixon White House, and all of that Watergate stuff was brewing somewhere around there. Vietnam was still going on. We were a cynical nation at that time. And the three of us, we all felt that this kind of song of spirit and of hope would be valid 100 years from now.
You're always a day. Oh,
Ladies, how old are you? 12?
9, 11, 9, 10.
Those Annie auditions were grueling. When I say 8 auditions, that was 8 auditions over a year's time. And some of the auditions were 5, 6 hours long. They would cut kids right on site.
So I want to keep you, and I want to keep you, and I want to keep you, and I want to keep you.
We drove up to New York with my dad, and it was crazy. There were thousands of girls in the streets, and we just joined the throng and went in.
It was crazy. I mean, crazy mothers, a lot of crying, you know, on the mothers and the daughters. I mean, it was very emotional. It was a very emotional process.
Well, of course, they all came done up. With the hair done and the bows and the fancy and the dresses, and sometimes they were costumed, and kids arrived sometimes in red curly wigs. Martin would immediately pull all the ribbons and the fancy and make them take all their hair out and mess it up and make them look normal.
There was this moment where you had to stand up to this line, and if you were too tall, you know, you couldn't audition.
In casting these kids, we would bring the kids in and have their parents stay outside. We usually have the kids sing Happy Birthday to make sure they could hold a tune, and then we'd dance them and winnow it down and winnow it down.
You know, there's this moment in the Primetime Saturday thing where they call me out on stage.
Allison.
And I remember that vividly, and even more vividly because I can actually watch it. I remember wanting it so badly. I just really remember wanting it so badly.
This is a very complicated and difficult decision to make, and we have not yet made it. So don't lose any sleep.
I noticed the stage door, and I pulled my mom in. I said, let's go in. And we ended up backstage in the wings during an understudy rehearsal. And the stage manager, after about 20 minutes, finally noticed me there and asked what I was doing and if he could help me. And I said, I want to be an Annie.
I had the enthusiasm necessary. I had the dedication. I think I really made it known to him that I was serious and I really wanted to do the part.
I think there was a kind of desperation about me. I think I kind of look like an orphan.
At my audition, I sang on the Good Ship Lollipop, and the piano player stopped playing, and I kept singing through the end of the number. And I think that was kind of like, they saw at the audition that I could go with the flow no matter what was happening, and it didn't rattle me. I just kept singing. Martin sent me out into the theater, and I was just sitting there with my mother, and Martin started walking towards me, and he said to me, what is your biggest dream in the entire world? And I said, every single time I pass a wishing well, I throw in 25 cents, and my wish is to be Annie. And he said, well, sometimes wishes and dreams come true because you're our next Annie.
I was the first person hired to play Annie in a Goodspeed Opera House, Connecticut. The night before we opened, they changed the entire play, and they changed the whole plot of the play.
We were dealt a death blow by Walter Kerr, who, for the New York Times, came up and wrote disastrously of the show. But we were given the opportunity to work on it, and work on it, and work on it, which we did for 9 weeks. And I would say in the 7.5 or 8th week, I suddenly remember turning to my wife and saying, this show is a bloody hit.
In April of 1977 at the Kennedy Center in Washington, we had opened and were a gigantic, mind-boggling hit.
We broke all box office records. I mean, the telephone lines weren't working anymore. There were so many people calling in for tickets. There was just this huge publicity campaign. We were everywhere.
Hey, Provo Man, hey, Dapperton, you're bold and your style, but brother, you're never fully dressed without a smile. Your clothes may be bold, bromally, they stand out a mile, but brother, you're never fully dressed without a smile.
It was a family show. And although it's a cartoon, it had a feeling of being life-centered. It was, the dances were brilliant by Peter Gennaro.
The theater was the original Alvin Theater, but because A-L-V-I-N had 5 letters, they were able to change the lettering, and they made it the Annie Theater, which is the first time, I think, in my recollection, that a theater has been changed because of the hit show and because it had the same number of letters.
It was a time in New York that pretty much the media, the local media, as well as a better part, it seemed the national media was saturated with stuff about Annie. I remember articles in the Sunday Arts and Leisure section, big articles about, you know, Annie and the children backstage and the life in that theater.
Annie was so huge that if somebody found out you were Annie, they would just scream. I mean, the little girls were just crazy about
We did the White House, we did Radio City and Kennedy Center and Carnegie Hall, and I sang all those places, usually by myself. I mean, sometimes the show went, but it was mostly me by myself, maybe with the dog.
It's the hard knock life for us. It's the hard knock life for us. Steady treated, we get tricked. Steady kisses, we get kicked. It's the hard knock life.
I think I did a Keep New York Clean poster with the then Mayor Ed Koch and, you know, with Sandy, basically about cleaning up after your dog, with new pooper scooper laws that were in effect. I think I was at the forefront of that campaign.
Some of my favorite memories are like when Henry Winkler came to see the show, and during Hard Knock Life, we all went, "It's the Hard Knock Life for us," an A.
I met President Jimmy Carter. I met governors, mayors. I met Robert Goulet.
I remember doing things like the Phil Donahue show and getting to tap dance with Sammy Davis Jr. because I was an Annie, which, you know, doesn't normally happen to a 7-year-old.
When Annie was in Washington, a friend of my grandmother's was in the Senate, and I went down on the Senate floor and they were having a vote, and I actually taught some of the senators the dance to You're Never Fully Dressed Without a Smile. Press would follow them, and parties were thrown for them, and they were always put on this pedestal. And I think they got very clearly that they were very special kids.
When we came to town, we were like celebrities, and kids would come and wait by the stage door, and we'd be signing autographs, and they'd follow us around. I mean, it was equivalent, I would say, to today's American Idol, how you can go from being a regular kid 1 minute to being a celebrity.
There was huge nerves and discomfort for me with being different while I was an Annie, because I lived in a small town and I went to school with kids who didn't do anything like that, and there were teasings and there were things of, you know, a teacher saying, "Hey, I saw you on blah, blah, blah last night at the beginning of class," and just wanting to die.
These girls love it. I never met one. They loved dressing up, and after the show, they all went out to go night clubbing.
We went to Studio 54 constantly. I must have been there 3 times a week.
If you're anybody or anything, you got into Studio 54. You know, me 12, and like Danielle, who was the youngest, was like 7, and from all of us, we're walking into Studio 54, and you have all these people. What the heck is it's going? We're going out and right in front of the line.
I don't know where my parents were, but I was there, and being stepped on, and I don't know what we were doing there.
My name is John Merrill. In 1983, I began to publish the newsletter Annie People, which grew into the Annie People fan club. When Hard Knock Life came out and I saw that line of girls with the pails and the mops and everything and the dancing and the singing, I said to myself, I've never seen anything like this in my entire life. People would say, well, oh, he's really interested in this show. He must be gay. Well, that's the way it is. I'm not gay. They think I'm a pedophile just because I did a newsletter revolving around kids. Well, I'm not a pedophile. I just happen to be a fan of this show. Let's keep in mind that The people who created the show were 3 middle-aged males. When I went to my 100th show, which was in 1990, a regional company had that plaque made for me, and they brought me up on stage and presented me with that, which was kind of neat. Here's some very unusual items. These were actual dresses worn by a couple of the kids in the movie. This one was worn by, I think this was Lucy Stewart, and this was Robin Ignico. These are actual, real, honest-to-goodness costumes they wore in the movie, and they came with a certificate of authenticity. I still collect. I still do that, but I don't stand around the stage door at any shows anymore with any buttons all over me with a clipboard waiting for interviews. I don't do that anymore. I don't take pictures. I still go to the show because I enjoy it, but I go incognito. I don't even dress up in any costumes or anything like that. To have that in my room, that to me is the equivalent of having Prince's Purple Rain suit in the Hard Rock Cafe. I mean, that's the best thing I have.
People have said, never work with children or with dogs, but I don't think anybody ever said never work with children and dogs. So this is how we beat that one.
But don't worry, I ain't gonna let them get you or me. I'll take care of you, and everything's gonna be fine, boy, for the both of us. Not today. Well, the sun'll come out.
One time in rehearsal, I'll never forget it, Martin got upset about something and he directed me in kind of a brusque voice, but you know, as I've learned since then, you know, that's just how it goes. You can't get, and instead of me taking the direction and just moving on, I kind of shut down and got real quiet and started hiding behind my script. And he gave me a little lecture about that's actor's revenge or blah, 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 and don't do that. And he was right, of course. But I started shutting down a little bit under all the pressure of all the, you know, big grown-ups and their careers.
You're going on stage and you're performing, and you can't take that stuff with you. There are times that I was on stage crying through certain songs.
I took the opposite route. I got really strong and became like Teflon from this business because of it.
I remember the person I was before I went on tour. I was this young 10-year-old or 9-year-old that was just a kid. But you grow up quickly, and I think you learn to interact with the adults as much of an adult that you can possibly be. You grow up a lot.
You're working, you know, on Broadway in a musical with mostly adults, and you're treated like an adult, and you're expected to behave like an adult.
I think that people don't really think these things through. The effects, the psychological effects that being in a show like this has on a child. I felt like, you know, a 10-year-old going on 40. I felt as if I were analyzing everything just to make sure that I wasn't coming across as a brat.
But I just remember certain adults in the show just really being nasty towards me. They certainly voiced their jealousy that I made more money than they did, that I was the star and I was only 12 years old. Things that just weren't necessary and that created a, you know, somewhat of a hostile environment. Miss Hannigan in the show sometimes would really hit me.
Turn around. I said turn around.
I got along with the other girls. You know, there were always cliques, and there were always, I mean, I think it's natural when there's, you know, little kids together or a bunch of girls together, even worse.
I got a letter that was sent to me backstage, pretty nasty letter. And Martin John had actually hired a private detective to follow me around the theater for a week, you know, because it was like someone was after my life.
One of the orphans in the show received somewhat of a hate letter from some other orphan, and it mentioned her religion, and it was really very vicious.
Started off with a good Jew is a dead Jew. Next time you get your period, don't stink up the place. And it went on from there, insulting my family. And it said, your mother is, I'm gonna start crying, your mother is a dumbass, your brother looks like a scarecrow, hide them both in the barrel. And it was, as you see, I've memorized the letter. It's something that, you know, I won't forget.
30 years ago, there weren't really the safeguards there are now in terms of protecting the children from a lot of the inappropriateness of an adult world.
This guy came up to us and he's like, oh, I'm a big fan of Annie.
And after kind of talking to us for a little while, he's like, and I have a gun, and I'm going to protect you girls. And didn't really think anything of it just because he was kind of strange. And he did. He waited in the lobby, and he would see us off to the show. And finally, like jokingly, we're like, yeah, there's this guy in the lobby in front of our stage manager. And once he got wind of the fact that he had told us he had a gun and he had been waiting, the police were on this man so fast.
We had no kid wranglers like they have now. And the kids pretty much came and went as they pleased.
This was 1978, 79, 80 for me when I was in the show, and there were a lot of issues that were going on in our culture that no 11, 12, 13-year-old really ought to be familiar with. But because I was in an adult world, there were things that we came into contact with that we really should have had no business knowing about, and one of those was drugs.
I think me and other Annie girls, we found some pot, but it was just like a little bit. We tried to we rolled it up in a paper towel and tried to smoke it, but it all fell out.
I mean, I just remember people walking around, you know, naked and the stagehands watching, you know, these videos.
Seeing men in jock straps and G-strings and like their heinies, or men slapping men on the behind, or men kissing, or women walking around with their boobs hanging out. I mean, the life of the theater is, you know, a circus.
The things that I saw, let's say like two men kissing, for instance, things, naked women and, you know, getting ready for, you know, stretching. It's like, that if I was in my little town in New Jersey, these aren't things I would have seen every day, but became part of your existence. And it didn't seem strange, which I don't understand.
There was a house of prostitution right, you know, halfway down the block that was not in any way hidden. You know, we roller skated around there quite often and taunted, you know, some of the hookers.
My family was always very open, and it was pretty blatant, though. It was before AIDS and all that, and we'd be on tour and we'd see, you know, people in the cast and stage managers, you know, walking out of hotel rooms with different boyfriends and things like that.
The thing I remember distinctly was someone I really loved who worked in the makeup department showing me pictures of himself dressed as a woman, which I just felt so sad because he seemed sad. And I just remember thinking, that's so sad. Why would you do that?
I was very aware that some of the gay men in the show would have this little sort of swagger in the closing number that would alert the audience members who were gay that, you know, they were available.
Well, I was horny at an early age. I think I learned about masturbation right around the time I got into Annie.
Who taught you that?
I don't know. You know, we bought this Shamu from SeaWorld, and I remember humping it.
I think the hardest part about being in the show was not going to school. It was hard not having those friends from home.
But we would set up a classroom in every city. We would transport the textbooks. We'd set up a blackboard. We did everything.
We got tutored, and we basically had no education at all. You know, I remember we would like leave in the middle of our tutoring sessions and we'd go to someone's hotel room and watch Gilligan's Island and eat Lay's potato chips.
I do think my schoolwork suffered being away. Our teaching was sporadic. It wasn't a very good experience in terms of learning, but it was fun to be in a hotel room, to have your classroom.
We certainly didn't have traditional school. We didn't have nearly as many hours, but I'm also hoping that I missed a lot of the garbage that goes into school. You just go in and do your schooling for 3 or 4 hours a day, which is probably essentially what kids are going to get out of it.
We had a tutor, and I don't know what everybody else's story about the tutors are, but, you know, mine was a fucking disaster.
My teacher could not teach my subjects. So often I was the one teaching the younger children, and my tutor was in the bathroom getting high most of the time.
In today's world, if you don't get good grades, there's a lot of disciplinary action on the part of parents. And I don't think there was any of that because the parents weren't about to haul them out of the show if they failed English.
Just because a child says at 5 years old, I want to be an astronaut, you don't bring them to NASA. You know, or if I want to be a rock star, you don't, you know, at 6 years old, you know, bring them into a recording studio. But there is this stigma where if a child says, I want to be a star, there are opportunities that you can exploit them to make money.
My dad worked so hard. He had a lot of kids. He worked 3 jobs, and he probably never made as much money in a week as I was making.
There was a financial element to it. I mean, it was a considerable amount of money,
at that time?
I knew exactly how much money I was making always, and I knew when I got, when I became Annie, how much money I was going to make, and it was a lot of money to me.
There are kids where, this money starts to come in, and there's a little cha-ching that goes off, and I think they start a little at a time, and they start to spend it because things are tight and the parents don't have a lot, and suddenly life becomes better. And it's when life becomes better for the parents but not any better for the children that things get out of whack.
I still have some money. My mother invested it, and there were some issues with controlling it, but my mother never spent it.
I remember when I graduated from college, I still had a little bit left. And my dad was like, well, you need that for a rainy day. I'm like, Dad, this is the rainy day. Like, what do you mean I need it for a rainy day? This is the rainy day. I need a bed. I need furniture.
I wish I could cast the parents in the same way that I could cast the kids, because I think it would be very beneficial to how people go out on the road.
I'm interviewing a child and I say, can you dance, honey? And her mother from the outer office says, yes, she does tap and ballet and jazz. That's the end for me.
And probably not a week goes by that I don't get a phone call from some agent or manager that doesn't want to know about the kid, but their question is, what's the mother like?
One of the little girls on my tour really wanted to be Annie, and her mom really wanted her to be Annie as well. And so she had a red wig, and she would have her daughter put the red wig on and go sort of make appearances. She would schedule these little outings and go into stores and have her daughter actually sing in the stores. And a day later or hours later, my mom and I would walk into that same area and they'd say, oh, we just got to meet Annie. And
Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their children than the unlived life of the parent. And I think that quote is just so telling in terms of the whole dynamic between, stage mothers and stage fathers and their children. She just became like the manager and got me all the auditions and, pushed me for piano lessons, dance lessons, all that kind of stuff. So I did question whether she loved me, but I don't know that I had the words for it. I don't think it was like a cognitive process, does my mother love me? I think it was more a feeling of just overall absence of love, neglect. And maybe that has to do with my feeling of I didn't exist before, because I don't feel like I existed for her. Once I started acting and I got that charge and that attention, not just from my mother, but from the world, friends, later on guys, whatever, I felt like if I was successful, people would love me, and if I wasn't, that I was nothing. Yeah, I feel like I've disappointed her because the kind of structure of our family, everyone rallied around my career. I mean, I hate to say this, and I really hope my parents never see this film. But I felt kind of like an orphan, or I fantasized that I was an orphan and my real parents would come find me someday.
My career before, my 15th birthday was probably my mother's, because she was so completely involved in it.
My mother and I were like sisters on the road. I mean, we just became so incredibly close.
I'd say that I don't push her. She can answer that herself. She can tell you exactly how it is.
I wanted to do this. When I was young, I always sang around the house, and I really wanted to do all of it, so I'm not pushed.
It wasn't so much about pushing me or wanting me to be a star, but it was about giving me an opportunity to do something that she would have liked to have done. She gave me ballet lessons and she gave me jazz lessons. So I got all of those things growing up, and it just sort of catapulted from a hobby into a career, and that's when everything changed.
There were things that I would not want to do. I mean, there are people who call up, who would call up and say that their child was getting bar mitzvahed, and they would pay $15,000 to have Annie, real live Annie, come to their child's bar mitzvah and sing one or two songs. And it was nearly impossible at times for my mother, who thought about $15,000 for 10 minutes to drive to Long Island and sing these songs for somebody. It was mortifying to sing for kids your own age and to be kids you didn't know at someone's party that you didn't know, and to pull up and be the show at a party where you just wanted, I wanted all the little gift bags that they were getting and all the stuff, and I was the act, and it felt a little bit like a freak show. There were gnarly episodes like that. Like, I really don't want to sing at the Kentucky Fried Chicken in Suffolk County. My mother and I had intense bonding experience that we went through together from beginning to end. Like any mother and daughter relationship, there's an end to the day-to-day closeness, to the major participation. It could potentially have been more intense than other people's because of how much we had gone through and how busy my mother was for a long time with doing all the things that I do. And then one day I'm like, I got my driver's license. See ya.
You know, I would never mention any names, but there was a parent on the first national of Annie that I had to reprimand. And then the second time, I had to threaten to go to the authorities if anything were to happen again, because I thought that this parent was being brutal with the child.
I actually had a mother take my hand and pull me back in the crowd to stop me because her daughter was the one in front. And that's when you just sort of go, whoa, this is not good.
We had a girl in the First National whose mother was also in the show. She was hired because she could do the job, but she was also hired to be there for her daughter. And she frequently was not there for her daughter. That fell to some of us. Here, take my child, I'm going out tonight. You're going out tonight. Well, what about? And they said, well, I'll see her in the morning.
I think it was completely natural that some of the mothers didn't get along. You know, you have a bunch of strong-willed women, you know, a couple fathers here and there that would drop by or drop in. I think it's difficult to be on tour for a year with people that you've never met before.
There was an incident where one mom and another mom started literally beating each other up on the street corner. I was young enough at that age to not really be fully aware of what the fight was about, but certainly we saw it, we witnessed it, and all of those things made it difficult to be backstage with the other kids when you knew that there were these things going on.
I remember one mother sort of grabbing her daughter by the hair, like a handful of hair, and dragging her, which was stunning to me.
What I would find particularly appalling, though, is that I can understand some uneducated mother who's at the end of her rope, who just herself wasn't parented well, and you know, does that. It doesn't excuse it, but I can understand it better. But when your child is being exploited for money, and they do something wrong, and there's some sort of corporal punishment for it, I mean, that's really sort of low down.
One of the mothers, she had a gun, and I remember, I don't think she ever really used it, but I remember being in the hotel room and seeing it, you know, laying on the table.
There was a time when the mothers were not allowed after half hour. They were banned from the theater. That should tell you one thing, that the children were happier when the mothers were not there.
Touring for my mom was really difficult. You know, she wasn't a good person who dealt with loneliness in a healthy way. You know, she would make the phone calls at 3 a.m. to my dad crying. My mother kept saying to me over and over again, she would say this to me every other night, you know, when you're tired of this, I'm ready to go home.
In my case, my father traveled a lot. So my mom thought, well, I'm not missing anything anyway.
It was a chunk of my life, but it was a huge chunk of my mother's life too, and my sisters and my father's. We all went through this together.
My mother also had a career too, so we knew that she was going to have to put that on pause and switch gears and go from being the actress in the family to being the mom that dropped the kid off at the stage door.
My mom actually ended up quitting her job. She worked for United Airlines to travel with us. We got into show business on a fluke anyway. But for my mom, it was great. She loved it. We got to travel around the United States. She had a Volkswagen bus from 1978 that we drove everywhere, like across the country with our tours. So we had a lot of fun with it. It was definitely a non-traditional upbringing.
When I went on tour, my mother came on tour, and then my father took a leave of absence. He was a teacher, and then he and my brother joined us. So we were, I don't know how many families were on tour.
My mother sacrificed a year and a half of her life and being with my little sister and her husband for me. That's a huge sacrifice.
My mom didn't go to college and hadn't ever been away from home, and that for her was like her college years.
I think my mom was enamored by show business, and that was fun. It's a great way to get a girl out of Brooklyn.
When I became Annie in the First National Touring Company, my mom did travel with me in the show and was a cast member. And the two of us traveled together, which was difficult because we had to leave my sister and my dad at home.
My mother was a single mother, so my family changed immediately because we, in making that decision, had to figure out who was going to take care of my older brother. It was decided that my aunt, my mom's sister, would move in with him. My mother and my brother were very close, and so I felt really guilty for taking Mommy away from my brother because she was all he had.
It was a wild community with all of the moms and the daughters and the one father. We had one dad. I think it was Deborah's dad. Yeah, it was Deborah's dad. He was the only dad on tour. God bless him. I don't know. That's a lot of estrogen to deal with.
Sometimes along with that new freedom, some of the mothers, some of the fathers would, reinvent their youthfulness and start, having new relationships, with a child who's doing a show who's just lost their other parent.
There were a couple of mothers who maybe were sleeping around, which was interesting.
One of the mothers who we were very close to and who was having an affair found herself pregnant and not wanting to go home that way. So my mother had to help her take care of that so that it wouldn't ruin her marriage.
We had incidences of parents that divorced while on the road. Did Annie cause that? Probably not. But the children blamed themselves for being on the road and causing mom and dad to be separated from one another.
There were probably times where I felt that what I was doing contributed to my parents' separation.
My father sort of cut off all ties with my sister and myself, so that was a little difficult. Not understanding, even as an adult, it took a long time to realize that I didn't do anything wrong.
In my case, I was on tour for 13 months, and that's 13 months where my mom and dad and I are not living in the same place. It's my mom and I living in a hotel, a different hotel every 2 weeks.
My parents separated while I was a nanny. Yes, it was a little bit, it was strenuous. It's a long time for people to put their life on hold.
I think that being a nanny actually expedited the falling apart of my parents' marriage because my dad got away and didn't want to come back. I don't know how it was decided who would take me on tour. It was upsetting to me that it was going to be my dad. I wanted to go so much, and I was just oblivious to how it could affect my mom and her life. I didn't see my father before I was an Annie. He worked, and he wasn't home in the evenings. He was someone I loved, but he wasn't in my life in a way that I felt comfortable with him, and it was very strange to go off and be with him all day. My mom trusted my dad, and she didn't want him to leave home. She was very upset because he left his job, and she just didn't know what else to do but let him have his way. I think he decided to go because he loved show business and he couldn't resist. I could hear my dad talking to my mom on the phone, and that hurt me because he was disrespectful to her. I went from being a very innocent little kid to suddenly realizing what my parents' relationship was and how hard it was to be a parent. I loved to be at the theater, and I forgot everything else while I was there. I wrote tons of letters home, but I wasn't unhappy, and that was my coping mechanism. The theater was a wonderful place to be.
On one or two occasions over the course of a really long period of time in many productions, it became apparent that the kid suffered from the one specific thing that I look for and usually can find, and that is the toughness.
You stole my shoes!
I did not.
Yes, you did too. Now where are they?
We had a girl originally, a very, very gifted young woman who was beautiful. And she sang beautifully, and her outlook on life was very rosy, and the play wasn't working. And Martin had the idea once of saying, we shouldn't use her.
In real life, I was more like Annie than I was able to do on stage, as far as my sort of gregarious cartoon. When I got on stage, especially when we got into the production much later, I started shutting down a little bit.
I think the greatest pain was the replacement of the original Annie.
They took me in the room, and Michael Price, who was so, poor man, I feel sorry for him because he felt so bad. But Martin and those guys couldn't face it, and they went, well, I'm sorry, you're not going to do the play. And of course I cried and was so upset. But there was a great sense of relief. I mean, strangely enough, because I thought, oh, thank God, I can just go home. In 1997, when the producers were mounting the 20th anniversary production of Annie, they had a nationwide search to find the next new Broadway Annie. Macy's sponsored the auditions, so the auditions were held in the Macy's stores around the country.
Barbara Walters was doing a story. The whole entire process was followed. We were actually in Connecticut. We were only, I think, 2 cities away from Broadway, 2 weeks away. And I actually caught bronchitis really, really bad. And so I went to the doctors, and of course, my personality, I'm like, no, I can do it, I can do it. I need to be on stage, don't let me, I don't want to take the night off. But the doctor told my mom, if you put your child on stage, I'll report you for child abuse. It was weird because I was at home sick and I was hearing all these things, because you normally have an understudy. And what happened was they weren't even putting my understudy on, they were putting one of the orphans. So they had obviously been rehearsing her like behind the scenes, like I had no idea. So in the middle of the night, like 3 o'clock in the morning, we get a fax and pretty much saying, it's the end, we're gonna send you home, we're gonna send a car. I don't remember much of anything. I became numb and I blocked it out. My mom reminds me of things that happened, but they had a psychologist there. And my mom was telling me I was like shaking out of control and they had like 4 blankets on me. Because I kind of felt humiliated and I knew the whole world knew about it.
It's not gonna be me coming down the stairs in my Annie dress and in the red wig. It's not gonna be me, Annie, no more.
We had a kind of a rule on the show that once the stagehands started to get interested in the orphans, it was time for them to move on to another job.
Every couple months, we would get a height check and a weight check, and that was scary.
But of course, the year that I took over, I think I grew like 4 inches or something insane, naturally, of course. I was concerned about this growth spurt because I really liked being there.
I toured for 1.5 years and never got bored once. I didn't want to leave after 1.5 years. I wanted to keep going, but I was developing, and they said, no.
The younger ones are coming to take your place, and you're 12, It's not like you're getting downsized at 50. You're 12.
10 years old and Annie on Broadway, that's fun. But it's not fun when you're 13. They say you're too fat, you're too thin, you're too this, you're not pretty enough.
I think that one of the reasons that I wasn't re-signed was that I was tall. I was Molly, and I was considerably taller than Christy, who was Annie. So the part where she's supposed to lift me up and put me in the bed in the beginning of the show was obviously not. She would go nice and walk me over.
I saw a parent interact with a child, and then the parent left, and then the child took her own 8x10 headshot and started stomping on it on the floor and screaming, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. And it turned out that this was a result of a comment made that the child was leaving the show because the child was growing too big. And this little girl was hating herself because she was being punished, in a sense, psychologically for having to leave the show because she was growing.
I sort of feel like that something was wrong and that we didn't have any kind of counseling to get back into life, to just pretend it never happened and never talk about it again and go back to regular life, which is what happened for me. It was hard.
Some kind of counseling on how to adapt back into normal life would have been probably very beneficial.
There's nobody that tells you that even though you have this amazing experience at a young age, that through no fault of your own, there's going to come a time very soon, especially in a young girl's career, where it's just gonna be over.
These kids came out of Annie, they were 12 years old, they were big stars, they'd been wined and dined, and all of a sudden they're 15. There's no work for them. There's no Broadway show that has 7 15-year-olds in it.
1 minute you're Annie, and then the next minute you come off the stage and they're ripping the wig off you and they're taking the dress off you and they're putting it on this other kid and they're taking her out in the lobby and they're taking pictures of her and people are saying, oh, Annie, 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 and I'm standing on the sidelines going, hey, that was me you just saw. That was my last show. So that was probably the hardest part, is just, you're done. You're finished. Thanks.
I can honestly say that my last performance of Annie was absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, I actually don't think I've felt sadness, you know. And I don't know why I was so sad. I don't know. It was just so big. It was too big.
You always think that it would never happen to you, just like something happens in your life and it would never happen to you. I thought Annie would never close.
If there are tears at this final call, it's all right, because it's our party and we can cry if we want.
Leaving the show was the single saddest part of the experience. I mean, just as young as I was, I understood completely that this was something that could never be matched.
No. We're gonna be together, and you'll see we'll be together a lot. Is that true?
You bet.
Sure.
I just miss going to that theater every night. I miss the Alvin Theater. I miss the Stage Door Man. I missed my routine. I missed going to the pinball parlor. I missed, $5 on matinee days for lunch. Missed the people, missed roller skating in between shows with the girls.
When you go back to school and your hair is still red, you definitely stand out. And being from a small town, everybody knows who you are anyway. So in my case, the town that I'm from, they even named a day after me.
When I got home, I didn't understand a lot of what was going on. I didn't understand a lot of terminology and what things meant. I remember a boy asked me to go out with him, and I said yes. And the next thing I know, he's telling everybody I was his girlfriend, and I went, we didn't even go out.
Some of the friends that I'd known before I left either treated me differently because they thought I was somebody. The people who didn't know thought that you'd have like a big head about yourself, and you just really found out who your true friends were.
I just had a real hard time fitting in because I was used to a set group of 8 children, and now I'm being thrown into this whole huge school, and it just was hard for me.
When I was a freshman in high school, the school did Annie. And I didn't want to be in a high school production of Annie. It was still very precious to me. And when I wanted to help backstage, they didn't want any help. So that was heartbreaking to not be able to use anything I could offer. And I just felt alienated.
Being on tour at such a young age, walking outside at 10 or 11 to give autographs to people is really a bizarre thing. And when you get used to it and you take it for granted, it's like, oh yes, I walk outside, I give interviews, or I'm on TV, or I give autographs, people want to meet me. It's a little bit weird to return home and put on a Catholic girl school uniform and suddenly stand in line like the rest of everybody else. After I came off tour, I dwelled in the past. It's that thing, you keep trying to reclaim what was such a good feeling. You know what I mean? I remember in high school them talking about, well, we're gonna prepare you for college and to go out into the real world. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? I already lived on the road in a hotel for a year, bopping around and packing and unpacking every 2 minutes. What could be more real life than that? I think in high school, I felt that there was something mentally going on because there were times that I felt like I couldn't cope. And so you go to a therapist and immediately you start describing your life. Oh, I was on tour at, 10 and, I do rock and roll now and da-da-da, and I can't sleep all night and I'm up till 5 in the morning writing. So of course they immediately diagnose you. I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I think that whole Annie experience for me was a manic episode,
When you're 11, 12, and you feel really lonely and that nobody gets you, it's hard. When all that goes away, you lose a part of yourself, and I lost a part of my self-esteem that was so wrapped up in being the performer and being special. You get a lot of praise for doing something well, and then you're not cute anymore, and the jobs stop coming, and what you were good at then, it doesn't really translate into adulthood well.
The hardest part was not being somebody anymore. You know, that is really, really difficult for anybody to go through. And to be a child and have to suffer that, if you don't have the proper parenting or if you don't have the support system to explain to you, you're still somebody. You're just not somebody up on stage anymore.
For a long time, I equated success with fame, and it was very hard for me to look at people would say to me now, because I'm a teacher, oh, you're so successful, and you, yes, I am. I can say now, yes, I have a very successful life, but I'm not famous, but that's okay. But when I was a kid, I didn't understand it.
It was like this dangling promise, you know, oh, I'm going to become a star, and I never did it.
Well, I don't really have an agent. I freelance. I go through a couple agents, and they just send me out on calls, but I'm not signed with any.
And there's always a little thing in my mind of, well, maybe something big will happen to me one day, and then I'll be saved and be this alternate reality that's exciting and fulfilling, and everyone will adore me. And that's just a bizarre pattern that doesn't serve me anymore.
The feeling that I got when I was in Annie, the recognition, the people screaming for you, I guess that was my 15 minutes of fame.
I remember thinking, gosh, when I was like 20, what if I'm not an actress anymore? You know, will I still be important to my family?
I did hear from my father and from other family members that my mother gave up her life so I could have a career. So that was a recurring theme through most of my teenage years and 20s, that I maybe owed something to my mother for giving me this opportunity. And that was a huge weight, burden to carry.
Being a child performer and no longer being a child performer and being a young adult is a transition. And it's who surrounds you that I think makes that transition bearable, doable, manageable, safe, okay.
When one leaves Annie after playing Annie, it's hard because people tend to think that you leave and you immediately go to bigger and better roles, although probably isn't much better roles.
Oh, look at our friend Sandy.
I wanted very much to be a teenager. You know, I wanted to be all the things that teenagers were. I wanted to be common and not stand out. I knew that people would want me to sing tomorrow. I knew that. And I didn't want to do that for a while because I never thought I sang it that well to begin with. When I went to auditions or anything I did afterward as a professional person at that tender age, I did everything I could to not be, you know, cute, loud, turn my ankles in. You know, it was very important to me that I be something else.
There have been difficulties. You know, there have been, sometimes I feel like I'm competing against a ghost of my former self. For a while, I didn't know if I was only still in the business because I thought it was the only thing I knew how to do. I didn't know if I was in it because I truly wanted to be or because people expected me to still be. I went through a period of time really trying to figure it all out. I felt guilty about giving up the business. I felt that if I did, I would disappoint a lot of people. There was a lot of difficulty to the point where I didn't want to tell my parents, and for about a year maybe, I went on auditions and I just threw them. I didn't want to get them, so I wouldn't do well on purpose. I still feel like there are things I want to accomplish. I feel like my career could not have peaked at 10.
Your self-worth becomes all wrapped up. You know, all wrapped up in it. You're only as good as your next job, and especially since you have something to, you know, compare it to. And because you think, oh, it's a piece of cake. I'm gonna get another, Broadway hit. But guess what? Life doesn't work that way. It's like a drug. You know, once you have so much success, you want it again. And then I'm facing rejection after rejection after rejection. I went into severe depression over that. I had, managers telling me that I gained too much weight, so I became anorexic. When you start at such a young age, you feel that pressure. You have to be perfect. You have to always smile, you know? You can't be sad. You're not allowed to. You always have to be on, and you always have to be happy. It was hard for me to face people who have made it, when I had so much success, and that there was like no doubts, of course it was gonna happen to me, and it didn't. You know when nights when you can't go to sleep? I would start at the beginning of the show and go through the entire script, and hopefully somewhere in the second act I would fall asleep.
For a long time, never dreamt about Annie, and then started to have dreams occasionally that I was in the show, but that the show had changed, and that the lines were different and the songs were different, and that I was not prepared.
Mostly dreams where I came back and finally did it right. Or, you know, they called me and they needed me in the last minute to fill in, or, but it's always really triumphant.
Just dreaming that, you know, I didn't know where I was going in the theater or on the stage, and I got there and doors were locked.
I'm back in the show and I'm like, oh God, I have to hide my boobs. You know, how can I still look young. I still look young. You know, I could still go on the stage. And then we go on the stage and they change the show and there's so many more orphans and it's not as good and people are walking out. I'm like, this is not the show it used to be.
And then there are weird dreams where the dress is way too, like, inappropriately short. I'm too big.
I don't remember the lines. We start out, and then all of a sudden it's just blank, and I'm kind of ad-libbing.
I get a phone call, and they need someone to play Annie. But I'm like 30 years old. But I'm the only one that can play it. But I haven't read the script in years, so I don't know my lines, but I'm being thrown out there.
I still know every word to every song. I still know all the choreography. You know, it's a good little parlor trick.
So the choreography is imprinted on my brain forever. If I get Alzheimer's, I'll still remember the choreography.
I have tried to reenact it from time to time. I do remember some of the Molly tap dancing thing.
Right? I'm ready to go on tour. How can you ever forget you're never fully dressed without a smile? I don't know why, but I still remember that dance.
It was actually surprising to me when some girls didn't want to talk about it. Because to me, it just represented such a pure and innocent time in my life. We've gotten together several times for little mini reunions, and it's like an instant bond. It's a sisterhood, it's a sorority, it's amazing.
I love you too.
And many of these women, I would say the majority of the women, have never spoken about it since.
Everybody, this is Dana.
Hi, Dana. We met a few years ago. Yeah.
It's just a special bond that we have. I mean, this is a great thing to put us all together. We just had this amazing childhood experience.
Favorite moment of the show? God, I think sitting on that table waiting for Smile to begin. I would run the number in my head almost obsessively the entire time we were sitting there during that first scene. And if I didn't run the whole number and it was time for us to go on, I would think, oh my God, I'm gonna mess up now.
Not me. Who wants to be on a dumb old radio? I do. So, for all of the Hour of Smiles family, this is Bert Healy saying, hey, Hoboman, hey, Dapper Dan, you both got your style, but brother, you're never fully dressed without a smile.
I think I put it away for a long time, and if anyone would ever bring it up, I would just be completely embarrassed. Oh, were you the one that was in Annie? And I just want to die and crawl away.
Got no folks to speak of, so it's a hard knock road. We have cotton blankets, sat on full empty bellies, sat on full, it's a hard knock life.
I can't even imagine what my life would have been like if I hadn't been in Annie. I'm so thankful for it. When knowing that I was going to talk about this, I had a scripture that just kept coming to mind, which is in Psalm 68 that says, God sets the lonely in families. Annie was my family for a good while, and there are people there who I'll remember forever.
it's so innocent and it's so special. And to have like a career to look back on now and see that it was an opportunity, again, given to express yourself and be free and simple and sing. I mean, all kids want to do is just sing.
It's very hard to share this experience with somebody who didn't share it with us, because it becomes more like lecturing an audience. There's really nobody to truly understand what this was like. And I think it can be a very lonely experience if you don't surround yourself from time to time with people who shared this with you.
It's a wonderful beginning. But if you don't have a balance with normalcy, a balance with reality, then perhaps it's better to get out of the business. And if you're a star when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, it's a little tough to maintain that on into your young teens and early 20s and so on. It's hard to maintain that because that's as good as it gets.
Somebody I was talking to, a successful actress, our kids had been in a toddler class together, my son and her child, and we were talking about just the ups and downs of show business and the different pain involved, and I was telling her a little bit about my history and being an Annie and so forth, and she said, gosh, that must have been really painful for you. I could see where you'd be bewildered, and I thought, bewildered, that's the word, bewildered. I never could put my finger on the feeling that I felt as an adult, like, what happened? I was doing this stuff, I'm good at it, I'm still good at it. What the hell went wrong? What happened? Being an adult in show business has been very painful at times, and coming from a place where as a kid I had a taste of that success and I was surrounded with getting jobs and being special. I remember not even that long ago, just, knowing that I was gonna have another child and crying to my husband, I miss it. I just miss it.
This experience is very bittersweet in many ways. It was so wonderful, and yet as an adult, it's really hard to fully appreciate it. I don't compare it to other experiences in my life. There's no way to do that. I mean, it's just so unique that that would be unfair to other experiences in my life.
I don't know if when you're brought up, growing up on the stage and living in the stage, that you ever get that out of your blood. I mean, that is true. The smell of the grease paint, the roar of the crowd, that's home.
It's still there. It's still in me. I'll to the day I die, I'll perform. Even if it's just in my living room or at school, I'll do shows sometimes with the kids and we'll do stuff, but sometimes it's very hard to accept that that might be over.
I always think of my life in terms of pre-Annie or pre-acting, the acting years and then the post-acting years. And really, when I think of the pre-acting years, it's almost like I didn't exist.
I had a hard time actually deciding what I wanted to do for a living because we're so spoiled as a kid to have this experience and grow up in show business. And I mean, the money is really good, and finding your first job out of college and trying to meet up to that standard is really tough.
I did the show 25 years ago. It's still on my resume. I mean, I've thought about taking it off a couple times because it's like, it's 25 years ago. Get it off your resume. But I leave it on there, and it's the one thing that people ask me the most about is Annie.
I'm not sure if I would do it over again. If I knew then what I know now, I would, definitely.
I have no friends from childhood, really, except, I have my sisters, but all these show business people are everywhere else. There's no class reunions to go to for me.
In the business, it's tough to kind of overcome that kind of iconic stardom. I mean, I swear if I invented the cure to cancer, they would still all, but she was the original Annie.
So I'm writing and producing and anchoring and loving it. It's incredible.
I'm still doing theater. We're in a theater right now. I'm starting my first day of rehearsal.
I am a full-time mom. I homeschool my sons for 6 years now, going on 7.
I'm a radio journalist, and so there are aspects, there are definite similarities with show business and that.
With motherhood, I have this universal commonness that is the best thing in the world to be. So it's kind of the perfect, I found my niche. I found my niche of being just like everybody else, but it's fantastic.
I made some records on my own for a while.
Then I decided I didn't want to make records anymore, and I just wanted to kind of be more behind the scenes and write and produce for other artists.
I worked for an equine vet for a while, and then I got my job with American Airlines, and then I completely transitioned out of show business.
Currently, I am an associate producer. I work on a show called Family Guy.
As a psychologist, I help people, and that's my job. And if I do that well, then I feel pretty accomplished. And to me, that's more important than listening to applause.
I'm a certified financial planner, so I do personal financial planning for individuals and small businesses, and I've been doing it for 18 years. All my clients are creative people, and so I can relate to them. I don't tell them my little secret here.
My one dream now is to be on Broadway at least one more time, and that is something that I look forward to trying to do. And I don't know, maybe I should start throwing quarters in fountains again and see what happens.
I'd be lying if I said that I don't want to be the lead in a Broadway musical again. I'd be fibbing out my butt if I said that that wasn't something that's in the back of my mind. And not only is it in the back of my mind, but maybe I am a little crazy because I think it's going to happen.
Everything comes, full circle when you become a parent. And, I understand that. That's why I don't think I'll put my child in the business. She gets older if it's something she wants to do. But I don't want to put that pressure on her at such a young age.
She wanted to be a doctor when she was really little, and I was happy. And then for a little while, she wanted to be in finance, as my boss was coaching her. But now she likes singing, and she likes doing theater. And if she wanted to do that, I wouldn't discourage her. I hope that she would get into something else.
And I like singing.
Yes, and she's good at it, and
It's
she's very
my
gregarious.
favorite thing.
The sun'll come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow
There'll be sun.
just thinking about tomorrow clears away the cobwebs and the sorrow till there's none. When I'm stuck with a day that's gray and lonely, I just stick out my chin and grin and say, oh.
The sun'll come out tomorrow, so you gotta hang on till tomorrow. Come what may.
Tomorrow, tomorrow, I love ya. Tomorrow, you're always a day away. Tomorrow, tomorrow, I love you. Tomorrow,
You're only a day away.
Well, this is the utmost song of optimism. Because we all know the sun'll come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there will be sun. Just thinking about tomorrow clears away the cobwebs and the sorrow till there's none. When you're stuck with a day that's gray and lonely, you just stick out your chin and grin and say, oh, the sun'll come out tomorrow, so you gotta hang on till tomorrow. Come what may, tomorrow, tomorrow, I love you. Tomorrow, you're only a day away. Tomorrow, tomorrow, I love you. Tomorrow, you're always a day